I'm going to defer and recognize the chairman of the full committee for questions first. So, Mr. McCaul, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chairman Mast.
Chairman.
Let me say first, I always like to start on a positive note. I think, look, we all recognize we have a problem. We all want to save the planet. I think we just probably disagree on the way to get there, right? And I don't like the idea of holding China to a different standard than the United States. And that, sir, will be your great challenge when you go to Beijing, is trying to hold them to the same standards of the United States. And I think that's what the American people want and what the American people deserve. If I could go back to what I said in my opening statement, and this just continues to baffle me that the second largest economy in the world is somehow treated as a developing nation for purposes of the United Nations Charter. And it's a self-designation. They self-designate that they're a developing nation. So what does that mean? That means they're in the WTO. That means they're given preferential status when it comes to World Bank loans. At sometimes low interest, sometimes zero interest loans that then they turn around and use at usurious rates to get truly developing nations in a debt trap. I think that's not only wrong, I think that's immoral. But then they extrapolate this argument, this logic, to climate change. They say, in their own words, they say China has said its carbon emissions should peak by 2030, and I assume that's why you're holding them to this 2030 standard in the Paris agreements. But then they say they decline with the goal of reaching carbon neutrality by 2060. Not 2030, 2060. And why do they say that? This is where it gets really amazing to me. I'm an attorney by trade, and words matter. The country, the world's largest carbon emitter, has argued that it is still a developing economy and should not be held to the same standards as developed countries in reducing carbon emissions. My question, sir, is very simple and very straightforward, and I hope you will give me a good answer to this one. How in the world can the second largest economy maintain to you and the rest of the world with a straight face that they are a developing nation, giving them preferential treatment, not only to fund their Belt and Road, but to get this special designation to not comply with an agreement we have to comply with sooner, but in their interpretation, not until 2060. And sir, I'm not saying this to make anybody feel bad or be argumentative, but as you make your case to the American people, they don't understand this. If I talk to my constituents back home and say, yeah, Secretary Kerry's going over there trying to save the world, it's great, but hey, guess what? China doesn't have to comply till 2060 because they lie and say they're a developing nation, self-designated, and guess what? The United States, we got to comply almost immediately. The American people understand fairness, and honestly, sir, they do not see this as fair.
I can't disagree with that. They do not see it as fair because a lot of people are concerned about this differential in the designation. I'd just call your attention. Let me just, first of all, I wanted to thank you for the shark fin sales elimination, which has really had an impact. I've been passionate about the oceans for years, and we've had the ocean conferences, and that was one of the big issues that we had there, and that's a major step, so thank you. And also, I greatly appreciate the U.S. Foundation for International Conservation Act, Senator Coons, Senator Graham, et cetera. I think these are important steps, and they show what we can do on a bipartisan basis. With respect to this developing, it should confound anybody at this point in time. And it's one of the topics. I've raised this with my counterpart in China and others. Now, we are at a point in the process of the meetings that are annual under the UN process where there's going to be a revisiting to that within that process. I think it's next year. And we've already been talking with people because we're going to need to find a way to put more money on the table, concessionary funding, in order to attract some of the private capital that is necessary. Because in the end, no government's going to solve this problem. This is going to be solved by the private sector. And the private sector is already massively engaged. We have a record amount of money moving into venture capital. We have a record amount of money that is targeted for investment, but won't deploy without our ability to be able to reduce some of the risk, which is something my office, our office, has been working on very, very diligently.
And I know my time's, before the chairman gavels me down, I don't like to be gavelled down. I'm a chairman, so. but let me just say, if you could walk away from this summit with just that one result, to take away their developing nation status, sir, I can't tell you how significant that would be to the rest of the world for a lot of reasons. And you know it's not a fair designation, it's a self-designation. And
Correct, but can I say to you, Mr. Chairman?
if I could have your assurance you're going to bring it up.
Yeah, look, I understand that. Let me just be frank with you. That's not going to happen in this visit. It's just not a mechanism or a rationale. It's just not going to happen in this visit. But the Chinese government understands that this is a growing issue of concern. And I just respectfully would say to you, this comes out of, I mentioned 28 COPs, and I've been to too many of them. And way back in 1997, when we had the COP in Kyoto, the Kyoto Agreement was reached, and it just couldn't work because it was mandatory. And a whole bunch of people said, with understandability, we're not going to do that if the Chinese aren't going to do that. So what's happened is we've been deadlocked until Paris. Paris, the breakthrough in Paris was, okay, let's not continue to do nothing because of this designation issue. Let's at least get every country to agree to sign on to something. And what's happening is, around the world, this has had impact. And it's actually working better than you might think, but not yet addressing the question you've raised.
Thank you, Chairman.